The handcuffs snapped shut without warning. Cold metal bit into his wrists as his body was forced forward, palms pressed against the hood. The street froze. Power had chosen its target. And it was already wrong. Officer Daniel Reese stood close behind him, grip firm, voice flat. Authority without hesitation. A black man in a tailored suit stood restrained in public, reduced in seconds from driver to suspect. Nothing had been proven. Nothing had been stolen. Yet dignity was already gone. Because this wasn't about a traffic stop. It was about who was allowed to own what, and who wasn't. And the fracture was there, subtle but undeniable. What the officer believed was not the truth. So ask yourself this: when humiliation comes from authority, do you submit or do you resist? Moments earlier, the light had turned green. The car hadn't moved. Flashing lights erupted in the mirror. Blue. Red. Relentless. The night tightened as Officer Reese exited his cruiser with practiced certainty. Boots on asphalt. Shoulders squared. One hand drifting near his weapon. Ahead of him sat a black luxury sedan. Immaculate. Expensive. Silent. Behind the wheel was a black man in his late 40s. Calm posture. Straight back. One hand resting lightly on the steering wheel. Charcoal suit. Crisp white shirt. No tie. Composed in a way that should have meant safety. Instead, it meant suspicion. That car does not belong to him. The thought arrived instantly. No speeding. No erratic driving. No report from dispatch. Just presence. And for Reese, presence was enough. The driver noticed the lights immediately. He signaled. Pulled over smoothly. Stopped where the curb widened. No sudden movements. No resistance. Just the careful obedience learned over years. The window rolled down halfway. Good evening, officer. Reese ignored the greeting. License and registration. Of course, the man replied, moving slowly, deliberately. Every motion measured. Not from guilt, but awareness. He understood how easily dignity could be mistaken for defiance. Reese studied the license. The name meant nothing. The address tightened his jaw. He looked up. Then down again. Suspicion didn't fade. It hardened. Step out of the vehicle. May I ask why? Because I said so. The pause was brief. Controlled. The man stepped out. Tall. Broad-shouldered. Hands visible. Calm intact. Reese circled him, searching for something to justify what he had already decided. This your car? Yes. Reese scoffed. Funny. What is funny, officer? Vehicles like this do not usually belong to people like you. The street went silent. The man met his eyes. I want you to explain exactly what you mean by that. Reese turned away and pressed his radio. Dispatch, run the plates again. Check for theft. The registration matches the plates, the man said evenly. You already know that. Moments later, dispatch confirmed it. Clean. Registered to the driver. Reese didn't stop. Step back. For what reason? Do not argue with me. I am not arguing, the man replied. I am documenting. Then the grip tightened. The twist came fast. And the handcuffs closed, again. Officer, this is unnecessary. Cold metal. The hood. The sound of restraint sealing in place. You are being detained for suspicion of driving a stolen vehicle. The man inhaled slowly, then spoke with clarity that cut through the night. Officer Reese, I am a federal judge, and you are making a catastrophic mistake. Reese laughed. Yeah. And I am the president. The cruiser door slammed shut. On that quiet street, humiliation had already taken shape. And justice had already chosen a side. and the line between authority and abuse had been crossed. The cuffs were still tight when the cruiser pulled away from the curb. The cruiser pulled away from the curb. The door was locked. The window was sealed. The sound of the street faded as the engine gained speed. Inside the back seat, the judge sat upright, wrists cuffed behind him, posture controlled despite the pressure cutting into his skin. This was no misunderstanding anymore. This was control. Officer Reese spoke into his radio like nothing extraordinary was happening. Calm voice. Casual tone. I've got one male detained. Claims the vehicle is his. Acting uncooperative. The word uncooperative landed harder than the cuffs. The judge stared straight ahead through the metal barrier. He did not raise his voice. He did not protest wildly. He was already shifting into something else. Observation. Memory. Record. At the next stoplight, Reese glanced at the mirror. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. Reese looked away first. At the station, the doors opened fast. The judge was pulled out of the car with a firm grip on his arm. Not violent. Not gentle. Intentional. Heads turned as they walked him inside. What do we have? An officer asked. Possible auto theft, Reese replied. Non-compliant. The judge spoke, clear and even. I am requesting a supervisor. Now. Reese cut him off without looking at him. You don't get to make requests here. The judge stopped walking. Reese yanked him forward again. Walk. The processing desk was bright. Exposed. The belt came off. The shoes followed. Personal items dropped into a bin, one by one. Wallet. Watch. Phone. Identity reduced to inventory. The desk officer opened the wallet. He paused. Pulled out a federal identification card. Looked at it again. Then once more. This looks real, he said quietly. Reese didn't hesitate. Fake. People carry those all the time. The judge turned his head slowly. That badge number on your chest, he said calmly, will be documented. Reese leaned in. You think threats work here? This is not a threat, the judge replied. It's a fact. The room felt tighter. Reese gestured toward the holding area. Put him in a cell. Cold concrete. Steel bars. A bench designed to break posture. The judge sat anyway, back straight, eyes forward. The door closed with a sound that did not echo, it sealed. Minutes passed. Maybe longer. Then footsteps. A lieutenant appeared. Older. Slower. Careful eyes. He held the federal identification in his hand. Sir, he said, voice measured, can you state your full name? The judge did. And your position? United States District Court. Appointed and confirmed. Silence. The lieutenant turned to Reese. Is this accurate? Reese crossed his arms. I had no confirmation. You had this, the lieutenant said, holding up the ID. The air shifted. The lieutenant looked back at the judge. Sir, you should not be here. The cuffs came off. But the damage didn't. Because the cell door opening did not erase what had already been done. And what Reese had started was no longer something he could control. The courtroom was already full when the doors opened. Not with noise, but with expectation. Officer Daniel Reese sat at the defense table, uniform pressed, posture rigid. His badge caught the light every time he shifted. He did not look toward the other side of the room. He didn't need to. The judge was already there. Not on the bench. Not above anyone. Seated. Waiting. The role reversal was quiet, but absolute. The same man who had been pushed against the hood now sat with his hands folded, eyes steady, dignity intact but sharpened. This was the consequence. The jury filed in. 12 strangers. No uniforms. No hierarchy. Just faces that would decide what power meant today. The first screen lit up. Dashcam footage. The traffic stop played in silence at first. Flashing lights. The slow pullover. The officer approaching the car. Then the sound came back. Vehicles like this do not usually belong to people like you. A shift moved through the room. A juror frowned. Another leaned forward. Reese's jaw tightened. The video continued. The grab. The twist of the arm. The cuffs. The laugh when the words federal judge were spoken. The dismissal. The door slamming shut. Frame by frame, the humiliation became unavoidable. When the judge took the stand, he did not dramatize. He did not raise his voice. He spoke like someone used to being believed. I understood in that moment, he said, that the outcome did not depend on what was true. It depended on who was in control. The attorney didn't interrupt. I knew the law would correct this, he continued. But I also knew many others never get that chance. I stayed on him. Reese was called next. He described training. Instinct. Safety. Procedure. Each word sounded rehearsed. Each answer tried to shrink what had already filled the room. Then the question landed. What specific evidence led you to believe the car was stolen? Reese paused. I had a feeling. The silence was immediate. A feeling, the attorney repeated. Reese swallowed. Yes. The jurors exchanged glances. The room felt tighter. Not tense. Focused. This was no longer about one arrest. It was about whether power could explain itself. Or whether it would finally be questioned. The verdict echoed through the courtroom like a gavel strike that refused to fade. Liability on all counts. The judge closed his eyes briefly, not in relief, but acknowledgement. Accountability had spoken, at least this time. The jury foreperson continued. Damages awarded in the amount of $1,700,000. A sharp inhale rippled through the room. Reese's shoulders dropped. His attorney leaned in, whispering urgently, but the words no longer mattered. The decision was final. Outside, cameras waited. Microphones clustered. Reporters called out questions that overlapped and blurred together. Judge, how does it feel to win? The judge stopped and turned. This was never about winning, he said. It was about making sure this does not happen again. And will it? He looked past the cameras, past the noise. That depends on what we do with the truth once it is exposed. Across town, Reese sat alone in his apartment. The uniform hung untouched. The badge lay on the table, suddenly heavier than it had ever been. Internal investigations loomed. Civil consequences followed. His name, once protected by the system, now carried a record. He replayed the night in his mind, the street, the lights, the car. He told himself he had done his job. But the silence answered back. The judge returned to the bench weeks later. Same robe, same oath, different gravity. When cases involving unlawful stops came before him, his rulings were precise, firm, unyielding. Not out of vengeance, but clarity. Because justice, when it means anything at all, must be louder than assumption, stronger than fear, and blind to everything except the truth. And somewhere, a driver saw flashing lights in a mirror, felt the familiar knot in their chest, and hoped, just once, that this time would be different. That hope, fragile as it was, had a verdict behind it now. The story did not end with the verdict, even if the headlines suggested otherwise. In the days that followed, legal analysts debated, commentators argued, and social media fractured into predictable sides. Some called the award excessive. Others called it overdue. But inside courtrooms across the country, something quieter began to shift. Defense attorneys cited the case in motions. Civil rights lawyers referenced it in filings. Police departments circulated internal memos reminding officers of probable cause, constitutional limits, and the cost of ignoring both. The judge watched all of it from a distance. He did not give interviews every day. He did not turn the moment into spectacle. His response was restraint, because restraint had always been his language. Yet privately, he reflected on the night that had changed everything. Not because of pain, but because of proximity. He had stood exactly where thousands stood every year, with no cameras, no lawyers waiting, no certainty of correction. And he knew that truth mattered more than the money. The compensation would go to foundations, scholarships, legal aid groups. Places where people without titles could still be heard. Meanwhile, Reese faced hearings that were not televised. Internal reviews dissected his actions frame by frame, word by word. Training officers asked him questions he had never needed to answer before. Why did you stop him? Why did you escalate? Why did you ignore evidence? Each why landed heavier than the last. Reese answered, but the answers sounded hollow even to himself. Because I thought. Because I assumed. Because I believed I was right. Those beliefs no longer protected him. His suspension became termination. His appeal failed. Departments that once would have absorbed him quietly passed. The badge, once a shield, became a liability. And in that isolation, Reese confronted something he had avoided his entire career. The difference between authority and accountability. He had mistaken one for the other. Months later, the judge presided over a case involving a young man stopped for nothing more than driving through the wrong neighborhood at the wrong hour. The facts were familiar. The arguments were not. This time, the ruling was swift. Evidence suppressed. The courtroom stirred. The judge leaned forward and spoke clearly, deliberately. Constitutional rights are not suggestions, he said. They are obligations. The words carried weight beyond the room. Outside, the young man exhaled like he had been holding his breath for years. His attorney squeezed his shoulder. That night, the judge drove home in the same car. Same color. Same shine. Same silence at red lights. When the light changed, he drove on. He did not feel fear, but he did feel responsibility. Because stories like his only mattered if they altered the ending for someone else. Somewhere, a rookie officer watched a training video that included a familiar face, a familiar night, and a sentence that could not be edited out. Vehicles like this do not usually belong to people like you. The instructor paused the video. This, he said, is what not to do. And in that pause, in that acknowledgement, the story stretched beyond one man, one arrest, one verdict. It became a warning. And maybe, a beginning. Justice does not always arrive with sirens or headlines. Sometimes it moves quietly, case by case, decision by decision, changing outcomes one life at a time. The judge never forgot the sound of the cuffs. Not because they hurt, but because of what they symbolized. A system that could be bent by bias, but also corrected by truth. Years later, law students studied the case. Not for drama, but for precedent. For the reminder that the law is only as fair as those who enforce it. The judge would tell them the same thing every time. Power demands humility. Without it, the law becomes just another weapon. On that street, on that night, the law failed. But in the courtroom, with patience, evidence, and courage, it answered for itself. And that answer, imperfect but real, carried a message far louder than flashing lights. Justice is not automatic. It must be insisted upon. Every time.